The sheer brutality of the Great War is a story often told, and we've shared some of those accounts right here. Yet, out of that carnage, emerged an unexpected field of innovation: the science of rebuilding faces. Our story today centers on a Turkish officer named Mustafa Epar, whose injury wasn't just horrendous, it was almost unimaginable. We'll delve into his ordeal, his path to recovery, and the visionary surgeons who dared to perform these incredible procedures. To really grasp the significance of this, we first need to understand the unique kind of hell that was World War I, and why the need to repair shattered faces became so urgent. Soldiers had been maimed in battle for centuries, but the injuries from this war were different. They were brutally, unavoidably visible. The grim reality of trench warfare meant that a soldier's face was exposed far more often than in any conflict before. A head peeking over the top of a trench was an easy mark for a sniper, and a single bullet could inflict catastrophic damage. On top of that, constant artillery barrages sent jagged pieces of shrapnel flying, shredding flesh and leaving men with wounds that would alter their lives forever. At the same time, medicine was making incredible leaps forward. Improved transport and medical care meant men were surviving wounds that, in any previous war, would have been a death sentence. But survival alone was its own kind of prison. The challenge for doctors was no longer just saving a life, but giving that life back to the soldier. For some, masks and prosthetics offered a way to hide the damage, but for others, like Turkish Lieutenant Mustafa, that was nowhere near enough. Mustafa was serving with the Ottoman army, stationed at the Dardanelles. History remembers this brutal chapter as the Gallipoli campaign, where the Allies tried to break the stalemate on the Western Front by opening a new line of attack. In February of 1915, Allied warships began their assault, convinced the Ottoman defenses would crumble quickly. They were wrong. The campaign spiraled into some of the most vicious combat of the war. Allied soldiers were pinned down on the beaches in a series of catastrophic landings, while Ottoman and German forces, dug into their fortifications, were nearly impossible to break. It was in the midst of this chaos that Mustafa's life changed forever. A shell from a British warship exploded nearby, and a piece of shrapnel tore directly into his face. The devastation was almost total. The blast obliterated one eye, his nose, his cheeks, and his entire upper jaw. It took half his tongue, the roof of his mouth, and a significant portion of his lower chin. A look at his profile reveals the terrifying truth. The entire central portion of his face was simply gone. Only his left eye, his forehead, and the bone of his lower jaw were left. Miraculously, Mustafa survived this catastrophic trauma, undergoing a series of operations back in Turkey. While those procedures kept him alive, the life he was left with was a shadow of his former one. Unable to eat solid food, he had to be nourished through a straw. Robbed of his voice, his only way to communicate was through the expressions in his single surviving eye. The surgeons there, however, lacked the expertise and the resources to even attempt to rebuild what he had lost. In truth, very few surgeons anywhere could. But one man, a New Zealander named Harold Gillies, was determined to change that, and on an unprecedented scale. He had seen with his own eyes the horrific facial wounds that were destroying the lives of so many soldiers. After returning to Britain, he successfully established a dedicated unit for facial injuries at the Cambridge Military Hospital at Frognall House. It was Gillies who championed the widespread use of skin grafting as a cornerstone of reconstructive surgery. Among his most groundbreaking techniques was the creation of what's known as a pedicle, a large flap of skin lifted from a healthy part of the patient's body. This skin flap was usually taken from an area close to the wound that needed repair. Crucially, one end of the skin flap remained attached to its original location, while the other end was stretched and stitched over the injury. This method kept the blood flowing to the tissue, dramatically increasing the chances that the graft would take and not be rejected by the body. In 1918, Mustafa was sent to Germany, holding on to the hope that a surgeon there might possess the skill to give him a new face. His destination was the clinic of Dr. Jacques Joseph, a German surgeon widely regarded as the father of modern rhinoplasty. Joseph, who had joined the Berlin University Clinic back in 1892, had earned a global reputation for his incredible work in reconstructive surgery. He had particularly distinguished himself by helping soldiers whose faces had been ravaged by the war. By June of 1916, he was leading the Department of Facial Plastic Surgery at a Berlin hospital. His entire department was dedicated to one mission: performing reconstructive surgery for soldiers who had survived the unthinkable but required specialized care to truly live again. The goal wasn't just to keep these men alive, It was to restore their quality of life. But what they were about to attempt with Mustafa was unprecedented. No one had ever tried to rebuild a face so completely destroyed. Reconstructing Mustafa's face would be a long, arduous journey involving numerous operations. The very first step involved making an incision clean across Mustafa's scalp, from ear to ear, to create a flap of skin that would eventually become the foundation for his new nose. To create the new inner lining for the mouth and nose, Joseph grafted a section of skin harvested from Mustafa's own buttocks. The wound on his scalp was patched up using another skin graft, also taken from Mustafa's buttock. That concluded the first operation. 4 weeks later, the second phase began. Joseph cut a flap of skin from Mustafa's forehead, folding it down like a visor over his eyes to the area where his mouth should be. The structure of a new nose was sculpted from a prosthetic bone that was inserted beneath the skin. A mouth, complete with new lips, was shaped from the tissue. They also intended to install a permanent denture, but this stage of the operation did not succeed. Incredibly, both of these major procedures were conducted under local anesthesia, which means he was awake through it all. The only time they put him completely under was for the removal of skin from his buttocks. After another 4-week recovery period, Mustafa was finally well enough to leave the hospital. While it was hardly a perfect copy of his old face, he had a face once more, and with it came a chance at some semblance of a normal life. Yet, a long and grueling road still stretched before him. He had to retrain himself to speak and eat with his newly constructed mouth. For a long while afterward, he subsisted entirely on a liquid diet. His new nose never became functional, though it did at least give him the appearance of one. But his struggle was not unique. For so many soldiers who were maimed and disfigured, returning to civilian society was an agonizing ordeal. These men had endured the most savage war in history, stared into the abyss of industrialized slaughter, and emerged physically and psychologically shattered. For those with scars that everyone could see, being shunned by society was a constant, painful reality. A great number of these men chose to stay in the sanctuary of the hospitals that had mended them. Inside those walls, at least, they were among other men who carried similar wounds and understood the hell they had endured. Unfortunately, the trail goes cold on Mustafa's life after he walked out of Joseph's care. It is believed that he made his way back to Turkey. We have no idea how he was able to fit back into the world, but judging by the experiences of other soldiers with such catastrophic injuries, it would have been a brutal, if not impossible, challenge. Mustafa's procedure was thoroughly recorded, and it wasn't long before the shocking photographs reached the eyes of the world. However, I must point out that some of the pictures you may have seen circulating on Instagram are telling a fabricated story. The images were first made public in 1924 inside Ernst Friedrich's anti-war book, The War Against War. In its pages, he collected countless photographs documenting the atrocities of the conflict, from bodies scattered across no man's land to the men who survived it. Mustafa's picture was just one of many such jarring images. Photos of the operation were also released by an American journalist, Joseph Roth, who was determined to expose the true human cost of the First World War. But after that initial burst of attention, the story faded. One can only hope that Mustafa learned to live with his new reflection, and that he found the support and care he so profoundly needed. If anyone is related to him or has any piece of his story, please share it below. The photographs of Mustafa's injuries and surgery are among the most arresting ever taken. They serve as a grim monument to the price paid by the men who fought in the first truly modern war. And they stand as a powerful tribute to the doctors who tried to rebuild some fragment of normality. For those who had been broken by the machinery of war,